Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma. Let's get started. There is war going on in Europe. Scores of countries are bracing for a death storm the world over. Taiwan fears a Chinese invasion. People across the world are suffering from inflation. The virus has not disappeared, and now its home country is whipping up more trouble. China is making dangerous moves in Ladakh. In the same region that saw the Galwan clashes in 2020, China's military is building bigger bridges and infrastructure connecting the border with India to their biggest military base, one of their biggest bases. Now, while all the construction is on the Chinese side, the consequences will be faced by New Delhi. Tonight on Gravitas, we'll tell you what China is up to, how India sees all these moves, and what it's doing to counter the growing threat posed by the dragon. How does the war in Ukraine impact India? Well, I can think of a long list, but I'll give you the most obvious impact. India's ties with Russia are under pressure. India's strategic autonomy is under pressure. The West wants New Delhi to dump Moscow and join their military alliance. India is not prepared to do that. Tonight, we'll discuss why. Why does India not want that option? You see, India's own strategic challenges, security challenges are quite complex, and the biggest one is China at the moment. It's a constant challenge, and now it's back in the news. At the India-China border, the PLA is making disturbing moves, and we're talking about a disputed border, a border where China has repeatedly provoked India, a region that saw deadly clashes in 2020. This is the region we're talking about. China is back in action there. And tonight we'll tell you about their latest provocation. They're building bridges. Not the metaphorical type, the kind of bridges that improve connectivity of their army. This is in eastern Ladakh. The construction is on the Chinese side. It is designed to weaken the defenses of the Indian army. Tonight on Gravitas, we'll discuss what is China's endgame. We'll start with the latest information that we have. Where is this new bridge? Near Pangong Tso on the Chinese side, the Pangong Lake. When did China start building this bridge? Well, going by some reports, around 3 weeks back. And you know how fast the Chinese move when it comes to construction. It's something they love to boast about. And this new bridge is seeing the same speed. In fact, it's being built from both sides. And this is China's second bridge in a year. It finished building the first bridge just last month. So now the second bridge is being built right next to the first one. Another question, why does China need two bridges near a disputed border? The purpose is quite clear, to get more soldiers and weapons to the disputed region, to have quicker options to attack. The first bridge they built can accommodate soldiers and lighter vehicles. The second one they're building is reportedly bigger in size. It's wider, which means it can be used for bigger consignments, not just soldiers. The PLA can also send armored columns with heavy weapons. Now let's zoom out of this map and try to look at the big picture. Why should India worry about these bridges? After all of this construction is happening on the Chinese side. India should worry because these bridges are not development projects. This is China ramping up its military infrastructure. After igniting the border dispute, the Chinese have been on a building spree, and these bridges are being connected with roads. Do you know where they lead to? One of China's biggest military garrisons in the region, the Moldo garrison. In fact, one of the roads is ready. It was completed in 2021. What purpose do these roads and bridges serve? They're meant to counter India's natural defense. I'll explain what that means. Let me take you back to 2020. Do you remember what happened right after the clashes in Galwan? The Indian army had responded by occupying strategic heights. Indian soldiers held up to 30 dominating heights, and this was just before the disengagement. So India controlled the heights, and from these vantage points, India could monitor Chinese forces. Indian soldiers could track Chinese movements near the border. Now China is trying to cut that advantage. This new construction opens up new routes for the PLA. Reports say it can circumvent the visibility arc of the Indian forces. So you could say that China is preparing for another clash. It is working on multiple options to challenge India. And this goes beyond roads and bridges. I have more satellite images. This is China's Hotan Airport. It is just north of Aksai Chin. China has built a second runway for military flights here. Here's another Chinese military airport. This one is in the Tibetan Plateau. The planes that you see on your screen are Chinese bomber jets. This aircraft is capable of conducting long-range precision strikes, and they've been deployed along the disputed border with India. Now join these dots. China is building all kinds of military infrastructure, small airports, landing strips, even heated accommodation for soldiers in the area, and these developments have not gone unnoticed. Well, if we can see them, of course the Indian Army can. Their Eastern Commander has issued an assessment, and I have that statement with me. This is what it says. The other side is constantly upgrading their road, rail and air connectivity, as well as 5G mobile network. The Chinese authorities have built border villages close to the LAC that can be used for dual purposes. So what is India's response? India too is upgrading military infrastructure on the Indian side of the border. In December last year, 27 new roads and bridges were inaugurated. Many of them are close to China. But there's no denying the fact that the Indian forces need more firepower. The United States, in fact, senses an opportunity here. So here's what they're planning. Luring India into their sphere of influence, deepening military ties with India. There's talk of a $500 million military aid package to India. What kind of offer is this? Reports say India could use this money to get American weapons, and this is significant. Look at the last few months. India does not back American sanctions. India does not join American criticism of Russia. India does not give in to American lectures, and yet Washington feels compelled to make overtures to New Delhi. Also, $500 million is a substantial amount, close to 4,000 crore rupees. It would make India one of the largest recipients of American military aid. But is this offer meaningful? Critics have raised their doubts. India needs to spend way more than $500 million on military upgrades. India needs major weapon platforms like fighter jets, naval ships, battle tanks. $500 million will not cover that. Purchases of this kind run into billions of dollars. For context, let me tell you how much the Rafale jets cost. India bought 36 Rafale jets for $8.8 billion. So the US may try to woo India all it wants to. New Delhi has to be clear about its needs. Diversify procurement, maintain strategic autonomy. Because the challenge from China is growing every day. Now, every war is defined by legendary battles, by fearless assaults, by steely resistance. History tends to romanticize these battles. We hear about sacrifices, about bravery. But what about the losses? Let me show you the real pictures of war, the pictures you should see. What you're looking at is the city of Mariupol in Ukraine, or at least what's left of it. Entire buildings have been wiped out by missiles. Parks and hospitals have been hit. Mariupol does not look like a 21st century metropolis. It looks like a graveyard. Unless, of course, you ask the Russians. They say Mariupol has been liberated from neo-Nazis. It's a strange way to liberate people. 21,000 civilians died in the siege of Mariupol. Thousands more were displaced, yet the city refused to give up. The siege finally ended on Tuesday after nearly 90 days. That's 90 days of relentless attacks. This steel plant was the last holdout. The Azovstal steel plant. It was defended by a mixed group. Some Ukrainian forces and some Azov fighters. Now, the Azov fighters, as we've told you before, are neo-Nazis. Their insignia, their slogans, everything indicates a far-right ideology. But since the war in 2014, Ukraine has embraced them. Russia says almost 1,000 soldiers were holed up at the plant, and these pictures show their surrender. The wounded were carried out on stretchers. The rest were packed into buses. What will happen to these soldiers now? The plan is to transport them to a former penal colony in Donetsk. Putin says all soldiers will be treated fairly, but some lawmakers in Russia are baying for blood.
They do not deserve to live after those monstrous crimes against humanity that they committed and which are being committed continuously against our prisoners of war, which we receive with our fingers cut off, and so on.
Normally, these soldiers would be placed in detention or maybe exchanged for Russian prisoners of war. But right now, their future is uncertain. It depends on what Putin wants to do, escalate or strike a deal. The fall of Mariupol is exactly what he wanted, and I can think of two reasons why. Number one, a rare victory after a string of setbacks, and number two, Mariupol could be a launching pad for his Donbas campaign. For European countries, this is alarming because they've seen what Russia is capable of, the airstrikes, the siege, all of it. And their priority is to protect themselves, to make sure that they are not next. How do you think they're doing that? By joining NATO. Finland and Sweden have formally submitted their application. It happened today. And NATO Chief Stoltenberg was all smiles at the event. He promised a quote-unquote rapid conclusion to NATO's Nordic expansion.
The applications you have made today are an historic step. Allies will now consider the next steps on their path to NATO. The security interests of all allies have to be taken into account, and we are determined to work through all issues and reach rapid conclusions.
So the West can't wait, sort of like a schoolboy waiting for his new toy. But one NATO ally is not playing ball. That's Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Without him, NATO cannot expand because all three allies must sign on new members. So can Erdogan spoil NATO's party? Well, briefly, yes, he can. But chances are Erdogan is looking for concessions himself, maybe to repeal sanctions or more Western military assistance. And if he gets that, the Turkish president will relent. So that's effect number one of Russia's war. More European states are joining NATO. They're seeking a common security umbrella. Effect number two is this. A stronger and more confident Europe is emerging, not out of choice, but necessity. If Europe splinters, each state will become vulnerable. Case in point, Ukraine. But together they can tackle belligerence, not just in their neighborhood, but also on the high seas. I'm talking about China. The European Union is planning to increase their presence in the Indo-Pacific. Their envoy is using some sharp words. I have a quote with me. Our motto is always to cooperate whenever possible, but to defend whenever necessary as well. It's a way of enhancing our capacity and our credibility in terms of defending our interests. What does that mean? Europe is making a sharp Pacific pivot. And that could mean anything. More voyages by European warships, more defense deals with Indo-Pacific nations. The EU envoy did not go into the details. But it's a good start by Brussels. The problem is they're not 100% committed. Guess what the same envoy said about China? It is a partner and a rival and a competitor. How does that even work? Partner, rival, competitor. I know politics makes strange bedfellows, but Europe needs to pick a side here. If Russia's expansionism is bad, so is China's. As for the Indo-Pacific countries, they must be more careful because Europe is not exactly the best ally. Just think about it. Russia is waging a war on their continent, in Europe. Yet they're buying gas from Russia. So if war does break out in the Indo-Pacific, thousands of miles away from Europe, what can we really expect from them? So the words are impressive, but we'll have to see it to believe it. Let's turn to Sri Lanka, where the inevitable has happened. The government has officially run out of dollars. There is no fuel, no imports, only an empty treasury. Where does Sri Lanka go from here? Technically, they have hit rock bottom, so the only direction to go is up. But that journey, going up, will be hard and painful. Pretty soon Sri Lanka will default on its debt. The payments were due last month, but Sri Lanka got a 30-day grace period. It made no difference whatsoever. In the last 30 days, things have gone from bad to worse, and the result is this: Sri Lanka is all set to default after midnight. When that happens, rating agencies will downgrade Sri Lanka, possibly to D rating. And D is as low as it goes. It signals the highest degree of risk. In other words, zero foreign investors. But a default is the least of Sri Lanka's worries. The bigger problem is shortages. You see, Sri Lanka imports almost everything: fuel, cars, consumer goods. Most of it comes from outside the country. And to buy those things, you need dollars. No dollars is equal to no imports. The worst hit commodity is fuel. As of today, there is none left in Sri Lanka, no fuel. If you go to a gas station, two things can happen. Either you will be turned away or the queue will be kilometers long. And the worst part is this: a petrol shipment has been languishing in Colombo since the 28th of March. So the fuel is right there in the country. But Sri Lanka does not have the money to pay for it. How long will this continue? The government says until this weekend. After that, the crisis could ease up a bit. Sri Lanka has just received $160 million from the World Bank, and that money can be used to buy fuel. But there is a problem again. Fuel is not the only expense. You have to pay employees. You have to fund subsidies. Where will all this money come from? Sri Lanka's plan is to print notes.
Against my own wishes, I am compelled to permit printing money in order to pay state sector employees and to pay for essential goods and services. However, we must remember that printing money leads to the depreciation of the rupee.
Well, that's a slippery slope coated with grease. Printing more money sounds like an easy solution, but it is not theoretically sound. If you print more money, inflation will rise, and that's the last thing Sri Lanka needs at the moment. Shortages, forex crisis, and hyperinflation. How is the new Prime Minister planning to tackle all of this? Ranil Wickremesinghe has three ideas. Number one, sell Sri Lanka's flag carrier Sri Lankan Airlines. Number two, print more money, like we just said. And number three, increase revenues by raising taxes and utility prices. That last one could trigger public backlash. More taxes means less money in hand, and it's not an ideal situation amid inflation and shortages. Nonetheless, Wickremesinghe is pushing through, and he's sticking by his bitter pill.
The next couple of months will be the most difficult ones of our lives. We must prepare ourselves to make some sacrifices and face the challenges of this period. I have no desire to hide the truth and to lie to the public. Although these facts are unpleasant and terrifying, this is the true situation.
Full marks for honesty there, but can Ranil Wickremesinghe earn the public's trust? That's the big issue for him, because Wickremesinghe has the Rajapaksa mark on him. He was appointed by Gotabaya. He's supported by Mahinda's lawmakers. So how independently can he function as Prime Minister? So far, it's been a mixed bag. Sri Lankan police have arrested 2 lawmakers for instigating violence against protesters. 22 others were banned from leaving the country, and all of them belong to Gotabaya's party. In fact, 2 of them are related to him: Mahinda Rajapaksa and his son Namal. Both their passports have been impounded by the police, so the law is taking the right course. No signs of any favour to the Rajapaksas. Having said that, one move by Ranil Wickremesinghe is raising eyebrows. On Tuesday, the opposition tabled a no-confidence motion against Gotabaya. It was defeated. Only 68 MPs voted in favour, 119 voted against it, and among them was Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. Why did he vote against it? Well, Wickremesinghe gave a long explanation on Twitter that he has no problems with the no-confidence motion. His concern is the technicality. You see, Tuesday's vote was a fast-track one. It called for Parliament to drop every other business and debate Gotabaya's ouster. That Wickremesinghe was not willing to accept, or so he says. He wants a gradual debate on the no-confidence motion. And if that happens, he has promised to support it. And this is huge. The Prime Minister is openly agreeing to support a motion against the President. Usually it's the other way around in Sri Lanka. But Wickremesinghe's position may not matter. Remember, his party has 1 seat in Parliament, 1 seat. The Rajapaksas have the support of more than 100 lawmakers. So the message to Wickremesinghe is clear. Your job is to fix the economy. Do not bother with the systemic problems. Just find a quick fix. Will it work? Well, that depends on the Sri Lankan public. If they keep protesting against Gotabaya, some ruling party MPs may rethink their support. If not, it's advantage Rajapaksas. For the moment, we turn to the United States. We've often discussed the many problems this country and society faces. Gun violence, racism have been topping the list. Tonight, I want to bring your attention to another such issue, bullying in school. It seems to be rampant in American schools. A story from Texas has brought the issue back into focus. An Indian-American boy was bullied in a school in Texas. The entire episode was caught on camera. And yet the victim was the one who was punished for what happened.
This is the Coppell Middle School North, a state-of-the-art institute in Coppell, Texas, one of the best rated according to Texas Education Agency. But it's making headlines for the wrong reasons. Look at this video.
Get the out. No. Get the out.
It's from the 11th of May. What you see is an Indian-American boy being bullied by one of his American classmates. The bully is asking the boy to give up his seat. When the victim refuses, the bully gets angry, presses the boy's neck, chokes him with his elbow, drags him down from his seat as his fellow classmates egg him on and film the entire episode. Watch now.
Get the out. No. Get the out. No. I get the angle right. Get that second angle. Hold on. No, I'm not getting off. Get that shit full thing. Literally nobody's sitting here. Okay, Ultra HD. Get that shit. Yay! There we go. Here we go.
The video has since gone viral. The student has been identified as 14-year-old Shan Pritmani. A reporter who spoke to the boy says he didn't want to fight back and get in trouble. What sort of trouble? More intimidation from the bully. What's worse is the response of the school authorities. Reports say they've held the bullied student responsible and given him a 3-day suspension from school. The aggressor got suspended for just 1 day. The parents of the boy have now sought an investigation. An online petition has also been filed. Last we checked, it had received over 30,000 signatures. Now, here's the thing. Bullying in schools is a global phenomenon. But in America, the statistics are alarming. Reports have often called it an epidemic of sorts, a rampant, widespread and pervasive problem. According to one poll, at least 90% of students in grades 4 to 8 have either been harassed or bullied in American schools. And each month, over 282,000 students are physically assaulted in some way or the other. The case of Shan Pritmani has once again highlighted this menace. It has also highlighted the deep flaws in American schooling systems, where the victim is severely punished despite evidence, as the aggressor gets away with a day's suspension.
Let's take you back to China. In the month of March this year, a plane crashed in China. It shocked the whole world. This crash of the China Eastern Airlines flight 5735. We reported it. The aircraft nosedived vertically from the skies. And the world has not seen a crash like this before. Why did this plane drop from the sky in the manner in which it did? Well, we finally may have some answers. Experts say this crash was intentional. The pilot could have pushed the plane towards a fatal dive. Why would he do that? Here's a report.
It was one of China's worst aviation disasters. These were the final seconds of China Eastern Airlines Flight 5735. The plane nosedived vertically with all 132 passengers and crew on board. The crash happened in March. Since then, Chinese authorities have been struggling to explain what happened to this plane. They might have some answers now. There is reason to believe that the crash was intentional. This report gives an insight into the flight data. It was retrieved from the plane's black box. The findings suggest the pilot pushed the plane into a fatal dive. No mechanical or technical faults have been found. These findings match what an American assessment claimed earlier. US officials too have analyzed the same flight data. They also believe the crash could have been intentional, but Beijing isn't confirming these claims.
The Civil Aviation Administration of China said it will continue to maintain close communication with all parties involved in the investigation, carry out the investigation in a scientific, rigorous and orderly manner, and release the progress of the investigation and related information in a timely and accurate manner in accordance with international civil aviation conventions and the relevant requirements of government information disclosure.
China Eastern Airlines is defending the pilots. It says there were 3 pilots on board. The team was qualified and was in good health. They had no financial trouble, too. The investigators say they are yet to analyze the entire flight data. They have a lot of questions to answer. It is unclear if they can come up with any definitive answers. The black box of the plane that carries all the flight data was severely damaged. It was found buried almost 130 feet away from the point of impact. The cockpit voice recorder, too, was damaged. Investigators haven't revealed if they were able to retrieve anything from it. The lack of information from China is fueling rumors. Unverified theories are floating on the Chinese internet. One of them claims a pilot tried to commit suicide. Doubts are being raised over the mental health of the pilots. Chinese civil aviation officials have cautioned against such theories. But their delay to come up with answers is giving space for these rumors to thrive.
France is debating the burqa again. This time the swimsuit version of a burqa, what many people call the burkini. Let me show you what it looks like, a full body covering swimsuit. Many Muslim women prefer this over the normal swimsuit. It is less revealing, it covers their whole body. That's why they want it. So the burkini caught on in some places. France is not one of them. This week, the city of Grenoble bucked that trend. The city council voted to implement new dress codes in pools in France. The new ones are pretty liberal. People can wear whatever they want. They can go topless if they want. They can wear baggy clothes. They can wear a burkini. Anything they want. But the French government is not impressed. The Interior Ministry is planning to challenge the new dress code. They want to ban the burkini in pools. And this has become a national debate in France. Technically, the Interior Ministry does have the power to do that. French laws empower the government to protect secularism, to separate the church and state. So Emmanuel Macron's government can ban the burkini across France. But let's keep the technicalities aside. What about the moral debate here? On this, France is divided into 4 camps. One camp talks about hygiene and safety. Baggy clothes are not fit for pools, they say. So by extension, the burkini should be banned. The second camp talks about religion. They believe the burkini is a sign of creeping Islamism. So to protect French secularism, it must be banned. The third camp denounces the whole idea of burqas. Veils are inherently misogynistic, so it's time to ban them in whatever form they come. And camp 4 is Grenoble. Let people wear whatever they want, they say. So you have four schools of thought in one country. It's a nightmare for any politician. Worse, if you're a self-proclaimed centrist. How do you balance four different opinions? A lot depends on how Emmanuel Macron perceives his mandate. Was it a vote for his policies, or was it a vote against his rival? Because Macron's rival was a far-right demigod. So many voters did not choose the president. They say they chose the lesser evil. But does the president realize this? Macron's first term was marked by what his critics called soft Islamophobia. He targeted Islamic schools, he shut down mosques. Some of those moves were criticized as Islamophobic. The question is, will those campaigns continue? If the Burkini ban is any indication, well, they will. Having said that, there is a rational angle to this ban as well. French law does not specifically target the Burkini, you see. It bans any kind of baggy clothing. Which brings us to another aspect of French laws. Do they make sense anymore? French secularism is called laïcité. In other words, the state and religion must be separated. Religious symbols have no place in public life. That's what they say. Now, in 20th century France, that must have made perfect sense. The population was mostly Christian, so there was no emphasis on public display or symbols. The perfect law for a white Christian nation, that's what it was. Then came the wave of migration in the 21st century. French society changed, but their laws did not. And to make matters worse, Islamic terrorism gained a foothold in Europe. Naturally, the French saw enemies within. They attacked the culture instead of the problem. Imagine if an Asian country had done this, or any African country. The criticism would have been global. But there's no such backlash against the French. Apparently, they're defending their cherished secularism. And this debate is not new in France. Last year, multiple French cities banned the Burkini. Some even forced women to remove it on the beach. A centrist should be able to temper such emotions. Unfortunately, Macron has not been able to do that. Under him, the far right has strengthened in France. His own policies have shifted right. So President Macron faces a difficult yet familiar question in his second term. How does he tackle extremism without targeting the religion? How does he balance secularism and religious expression? The far right and the far left have clear answers to both questions. Not good answers, but clear answers. But as always, the centrist drowns in confusion. Let's turn to Israel, which does not bother with any such balancing acts. It seems to have its priorities straight. Topping the list is national security, and to secure that, Israel goes to any lengths. Their enemy number one is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, fun facts. Iran and Israel do not share borders. Iran and Israel have no territorial disputes. Yet Iran and Israel remain at loggerheads. Blame religion and ideology. Iran opposes the very existence of Israel. It says Israel has illegally occupied Palestinian land. They've exchanged multiple threats over the years, and some fire too. Last month, we saw more of the same. Iran threatened to strike the heart of Israel if it made the slightest of moves against Tehran. And these were the exact words of Ibrahim Raisi, the Iranian president. Do you know what's Israel's response? They're planning to practice a military strike on Iran. They will carry out drills, simulating strikes on the Iranian regime. And they're calling this exercise the Chariots of Fire. Reports say it will be the largest military drill in Israel's history. What does it hope to achieve? Three things. Number one, maintain a high level of readiness. Number two, improve Israel's military capabilities. And three, prepare for a multi-front and prolonged war on all its borders. Israel says this exercise was required because the threat from Iran is growing. The country's leadership, its military, its media, they've all been warning Israel of an impending war. Let me show you what an Iranian mouthpiece did a few months back. It published a map of Israel riddled with markers. The message was clear. Iran could strike Israel whenever it wants, wherever it wants. And attached with this was a forward warning. Just one wrong move. That's what it said. Just one wrong move. A couple of weeks later, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a threat. It said it was going to launch a fight against quote-unquote international Zionism. Now, this was a direct reference to Israel's global influence, international Zionism. Now, given these warnings, Israel says it's not taking any chances. It cannot afford to. It's already struggling with domestic unrest. There are clashes underway in Jerusalem. They've been on for the last 2 months. The situation is precarious. The warnings from Iran are adding to their worries. So these drills are aimed at sending a message that Israel is prepared to combat all threats, internal and external. The drills will begin on the 29th of May. That's less than 2 weeks from now. What are they planning to do in these drills? Israel has laid out an exhaustive plan. This is what they say they'll do. All units of Israel's defense forces will take part in the drills. They will focus on fighting along Israel's northern border, including a possible battle with the Iran-backed Hezbollah movement in Lebanon. A large number of Israeli fighter jets will also take part in the drill, and they will be provided with a stream of targets by Israel's target-generating intel unit. Now, these targets will be compiled based on intelligence intercepts from Iran. Israel says the simulated targets will not just be Iranian facilities, but also strategic units located deep underground. The US Air Force will also help Israel refuel its fighter jets mid-air during these drills. So yes, America will participate in these drills, where Israel practices striking Iran. In fact, the chief of the US Army Central Command is already in Israel to prepare for the drills. His name is General Michael Kurilla. He landed in Tel Aviv on Tuesday. Remember, this comes at a time when nuclear talks with Iran have hit a roadblock. Iranian officials have refused to curtail their missile program. The war in Ukraine has complicated things further. At a time like this, the US will attend drills aimed at Iran. What kind of message does this send? We understand Israel's fears. It faces an existential threat from Iran, it says. But what about the Americans? What's in it for them? A chance to make Iran buckle under pressure, perhaps. Seek concessions in the stalled nuclear talks. Will the strategy work, or will it provoke Iran further? That is the question that's being debated. For the moment, we'll shift our attention to what's happening in Australia. It will elect its new Prime Minister on the 21st of May, this weekend. The campaign is in its final stretch. The incumbent, Scott Morrison, is struggling. He has fallen behind in the opinion polls. But one issue could secure his re-election. China is central to what's happening in Australia right now in this election. A Chinese Navy spy ship has been spotted on Australia's western coast. Canberra says the ship is conducting electronic surveillance. How serious are these charges, and how will they impact the election in Australia? Here's a report.
There is an unlikely campaigner in Australia's election. Xi Jinping. A conservative lobby group has put up this poster. It shows the Chinese president casting a vote for the Labour Party. Xi Jinping may have nothing to do with democracies, but in Australia, his name has come up on billboards and posters. He even features in campaign speeches. Scott Morrison is leveraging the attack ads against Labour. He wants to paint his political rivals as sympathisers of China.
It's a very important issue, Kieran, and you've raised it. It's a very important issue, and I'm sure the Labor Party would agree. But what I don't understand is that when something of this significance takes place, why would you take China's side?
The Morrison government is making more claims. Just before Australians cast their vote, Canberra says China is trying to snoop on Australia. A Chinese warship has been spotted on Australia's western coastline. The Australian Defence Minister claims the ship is there to gather intelligence.
The Chinese warship with an intelligence gathering capability. It's obviously very strange that it's come this far south, and it's hugging the coastline as it goes north. And its intention will be to collect as much electronic intelligence as it can, and that's, as I say, just very unusual. We haven't seen a ship from the People Liberation Army Navy come this far south.
The spying allegations are yet to be proven conclusively. But this issue is just what Morrison needed. He faces a tough fight. The Labour Party is ahead of the Conservatives. Opinion polls say Labour could win 52% of the vote. The Conservatives are at 48%. Labour Party leader Anthony Albanese is highlighting Morrison's setbacks in office. He claims the Conservatives failed to stop China from entering the Pacific. They point at the deal Beijing has struck with the neighbouring Solomon Islands.
This has been a massive foreign policy failure. Some have commentated that it's the biggest failure since the Second World War. The government said they were going to have a Pacific step up. Instead, it's a Pacific stuff up.
There are issues beyond China though. Australians are concerned about the rising cost of living. Inflation has touched a 20-year high. Prices of food, electricity and other goods have shot up. Climate change is another worry. A record number of wildfires and floods in recent years has disrupted the lives of Australians. Both candidates are making tall promises. The results on 21st May will decide which leader's pitch worked better.
Now let's take a look at what else is making news across the world. This is Gravitas Global Headlines.
Russia's defense ministry says that 959 Ukrainian soldiers surrendered this week at the besieged Azovstal steel plant in Ukraine's port city of Mariupol. In one of the largest such developments in its history, the International Criminal Court has sent a 42-member team to Ukraine to probe alleged war crimes amid Ukraine blaming hundreds of civilian killings on Russian forces. According to a new report, pollution was responsible for some 9 million premature deaths in 2019, or 1 in 6 deaths globally. Japan's Nuclear Regulation Authority granted initial approval for a plan for releasing water from the destroyed Fukushima nuclear power plant into sea, citing there are no safety issues. Amid a COVID-19 outbreak in unvaccinated North Korea, the WHO warns that high levels of transmission of the virus among unvaccinated people creates a higher risk of new variants. British consumer price inflation hit an annual rate of 9% in April, the highest recorded since the 1980s, when the official estimates began. The world's tallest building, Burj Khalifa, disappeared behind a grey layer of dust as sandstorms sweeping West Asia hit the United Arab Emirates. The wildfire in New Mexico is now the state's largest recorded wildfire and has spread over nearly 1,300 square kilometers, burning more than 260 homes. Liverpool have ensured the Premier League title race will go down to the final day of the season. The Reds rallied from a goal down to beat Southampton 2-1. Jurgen Klopp's side are 1 point behind Manchester City, who will still retain the title with a win against Aston Villa on Sunday. Miami Heat have drawn first blood in the NBA Eastern Conference Finals with a 118-107 point win over the Boston Celtics. Miami talisman Jimmy Butler starred with 41 points as the hosts rallied from an 8-point halftime deficit.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.